and welcome to today's session of the Natural Birth Summit. Today, we're talking about anxiety and stress in natural birth and how to handle it. And we are fortunate to have with us the legend Barbara Harper. Hello, Barbara.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you.
Barbara has been a pioneer of gentle birth and the use of water for labour and birth for many years. And she continues to educate new generations of families and midwives to support women to achieve the births that they want. Barbara has written many books, including the bestseller Gentle Birth Choices, which now exceeded 2 million sales in various languages. Barbara has a new book which is in the works, which will be coming out before the end of 2023, and we look forward to that. Barbara, what did I miss?
Oh my gosh. Well, you see behind me, this picture right here is the graduating class of my grandmother in 1919. So I grew up in a nursing family. She was a nurse and a midwife. And we couldn't walk down the street in our little village in Ohio, Northwest Ohio, without somebody saying, here's my son, Charlie, you delivered him, whatever. She was an icon in the community. And she was my role model. I didn't know it growing up, but she had textbooks of midwifery on her bookshelf, which I read when I was a child. I knew how babies got out before I knew how they got in. They wouldn't tell me that part until I was about 11 or so. And then I was shocked. I was like, no, you're kidding. Oh my gosh. So yes, my love of birth and babies and motherhood has been my entire life. And in 1965, when I peeked through a window and watched my mother give birth to my baby brother, he's 14 years or 13 years younger than I am, I went home and wrote in my journal, we must change the way we welcome babies into the world. And even though my mother gave birth vaginally, they cut the cord right away. They put the baby in a little plastic box and brought him over to the window and showed me. They wouldn't let me in the hospital to hold my mother's hand and wipe her brow because I was only 13. And I was so upset about that I actually still have that journal. I wrote in it that we have to change things. This has to change. And yes, I was a volunteer at the hospital, and then I went into nursing, but I got kicked out of obstetrics and nursing because I was a rabble rouser. This is the early 1970s. Okay. I watched my first birth in the hospital as a student nurse was 1971. So that's how many? 52 years.
52 years. Yeah. Wow.
So, but I couldn't take it. Because women were told what to do and how to do it, and they were put to sleep and their babies were hauled out. We used to call it, in those days, in the early 70s, we called it knock them out, drag them out. Knock the women out so they don't remember anything and drag the babies out with forceps. Okay, why was our cesarean rate so low in 1974 when I graduated from nursing school? Because the forceps rate was very high. And so this wasn't about women giving birth on their own and in their own power. It was about women being subdued and told not to breastfeed because it would ruin their shape. And there were so many calculated lies that when I gave birth in 1978, I gave birth in the hospital where I was working, but by that time they'd kicked me out of OB and I was working in neurosurgical intensive care and cardiac intensive care.
Okay.
I was saving people's lives on the other end or watching them go. But after I gave birth in the same hospital where I had practiced as an obstetric nurse, I had a it was torture. It was horrible, and I knew everything. I took Lamaze classes. I even trained to be a Lamaze teacher
Okay.
way back when. But nothing could save me from the traumatic birth that I had. At least I gave birth vaginally. I refused a cesarean. They offered me a cesarean. They basically told me I had to have one. And I said, you prove to me that my pelvic bones are too small for this small baby. I didn't know if I was having a boy or a girl. And they actually took me to x-ray in labor and x-rayed my pelvis and then used the calipers. And the doctor came back in and said, well, it looks like you have room, but you can have the baby now or you can wait and you'll be exhausted and da, 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 and all that. They truly put on the torture. And so
Uh,
after that, I divorced that husband because he wouldn't protect me, and and I said never again. But fast forward 6 years, and I'm with a new person, a new husband, and I hear about Waterbirth. I hear about it from a woman who was preparing for it. And I was working as a pediatric specialist in a clinic, and and she gave me a magazine, and the magazine was like one of your daily sensational rags that nobody trusts and
right.
no, but you read it anyway because, well, maybe there's a kernel of truth in it. Yeah. And this one was called the National Enquirer, and it had pictures of Igor Tchaikovsky, a double page opening with pictures of a glass tank in Moscow and babies floating through the legs of women with the umbilical cord still attached. And I looked at that and I was like,
Yeah. Double
what?
take. Yeah.
And I asked the woman if I could borrow the magazine. And I took it home to my husband and I said, he'd been asking me for a baby. And I said, no, once enough. That's it. I'm not going to go through that again. And I showed it to him. And his parents were both born in what's now Russia. This was then the Soviet Union. And he was a Jew. His parents were Jewish immigrants to the US. And and so I showed him this, and he said, "Great, let's go to Moscow and have a baby in the water." It was his like, let's get pregnant right now and go back to Russia and give birth. And I said, wait. I have to do some research. And so I was living in beautiful Montecito, sunny Santa Barbara, California. And I got in the car and went to the UCLA Medical Library to pull the library, files and cards and find textbooks on water birth.
And were there any textbooks on Waterbirth? No,
No,
nothing.
nothing. The year was 1983. Okay,
Right.
so exactly 40 years to this date. And that it, I left a request at the library to do an intra-library search through the UC system. And about a month later, somebody called me from Los Angeles and said, we found one published article on giving birth in water. And I said, really? Okay. Send it to me. Well, we don't know if you should have it or not. It's in French. I said, I can find somebody to translate it. Please send it. Well, it's quite old. And, well, how old could it be? What, 1960s? And she goes, older. And she goes, are you sitting down? I said, yes, I'm sitting down. She said, well, it was published in 1805, in the year 1805. And it
Wow.
was a case study of one birth, a home birth in Paris. And the woman was having a long prodromal labor, and her physician came to the house and told the maid, draw her a bath. And she got into the bathtub, and boom, labor just progressed very quickly. And she couldn't get out in order to give birth on the bed. And she had the baby in the bath, and they wrote the report, the baby survived. And so the only two things that I could read about Waterbirth were a hugely fabricated story about Igor Tarkovsky in a not so reliable popular magazine, and an
Right.
1805 article from a French physician. And with that, I started my career in Waterbirth. And I haven't stopped a single day. Oh my gosh. It's just, I just, Adam, there was something in me that just opened up the floodgates, if you were. And
Yeah.
I started researching. And on February 9th, 1984, I consented to conception. I I told my husband, I'm ready. Let's do this. We are going to have a water birth, and I'm going to. And I had had a dream, and I said I'm going to change the lives of millions of people because of it. And so, yes, I wrote I taught my very first workshop. I gave birth um, October 27th, 1984, to my second baby at home in a home built bathtub made out of PVC poles and waterbed fabric. And it actually collapsed after the birth, and I had 300 gallons of water on my hardwood floors. And I said, oh, I have to design a birth pools. So you would appreciate that, Adam, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And I was so happy to see the birth pool in a box design that I called you up on the phone in 2000 and end of 2005, beginning 2006, and
We just
said,
released it. Yeah.
I've got to sell these all over the world. You're going to give me exclusive rights to sell these everywhere. And you did. You did. So our partnership has been for many, many years, but
Yeah,
I've
17 years. Yeah.
I've had convolutions, and and now I teach primarily doctors and midwives, upper level courses, sometimes 3 days, 4 days, sometimes a week long seminars in places all around the world. I've been in 75 countries to do that, to teach them not just the effects of laboring and giving birth in water, but I start with the principles and practices of gentle birth.
Right.
Because let's say you're a doctor in Egypt, in Cairo, Egypt, and your personal cesarean birth rate, I don't call it cesarean section, I call it cesarean birth. Cesarean birth rate is the typical 85 to 90% of all the clients you have are born, those babies are born by cesarean. And you just out of curiosity come to a lecture that I give, a full day lecture that I give at the Ahmed Meyer Medical School in Cairo. And you how can you go from a 90% cesarean rate to giving birth in water unless you give them an opportunity to understand that it's not just the water. You could do these same principles on the bed, on the floor, on the toilet,
Right.
in the shower.
I need to stop you because my light went. So we're going to have to start, unfortunately, where you sort of imagine you're the opposite. Yeah, okay. So, but this is great. Yeah, okay. So kick it off again about Egypt, Cairo.
So just imagine that you're one of the typical physicians that has a 90% cesarean birth rate. I never say cesarean section, I always say cesarean birth. Okay. Because how a baby's born is how a baby's born. And you just happen to come to a full day lecture at the Ahmed Meyer Medical School in Cairo. And how do you go from a 90% cesarean rate to integrating water into your facility, and suddenly you're assisting with water birth? I tell them all, first, you have to start birthing gently. You have to decrease your cesarean birth rate. You have to increase a woman's comfort. I stood up in front of a group in Alexandria, Egypt. It was a Pan-African conference, and many Muslim doctors, including women, who wouldn't even look at a vaginal birth because it was risque to look at that. And so there's all kinds of things that I include in a 3-day seminar on water birth, because I think we all have the capacity to be a gentle birth guardian. And so I call it guardianship. So you can be a doctor, you can be a nurse, you can be a midwife, you can be a doula, but there's someone in the room that knows how to increase this woman's comfort, increase her confidence, decrease her fear, because those are flip sides of the same coin. If you can walk into a room like I did when I was in Ho Chi Minh City, the former Saigon, Vietnam, and they brought me into active labor cases, and I had a team of doctors and nurses behind me, and I would go up to a woman and I would make eye contact and pick up her hand and hold it, or stroke her arm gently and say, take a deep breath with me. We're gonna breathe together. That's it. That's it. Let it go. Now, I want you to close your eyes and visualize being on the beach. Just put your feet into the water. That's it. Let your toes sink into the sand. Feel the warm water of the ocean lapping up against your ankles and your legs. Hear the seagulls. And 5 minutes before, the nurses, she was not coping. And now I've got this room full of doctors and nurses going like, what are you doing? Well, right. I'm practicing the very first gentle birth principle. And the very first gentle birth principle is she, the person who is pregnant and giving birth, has the power, along with her baby and along with Mother Nature, to bring about the birth. And we have to acknowledge her as the central focus, right, of that process. So address her, see her humanity, and make her feel comfortable. I stayed with her throughout her whole entire labor and birth, and they got to witness her getting up and making noises and walking and squatting, and the nurses at this hospital, they hired they originally hired me, the doctors hired me to come there to teach water birth, but what I ended up teaching was gentle birth because
Right.
they had one kiddie pool, and I told them, no, we cannot do water birth in this. It's not big enough. It's not tall enough. It has to be functional. And so I ordered a birth pool in a box and donated it to the hospital. I've donated birth pool in a boxes to hospitals all over the world. The first hospitals in Israel that did water births was because, okay, if you're using the excuse that you can't afford the equipment, we're going to donate the equipment. We're going to bring it there. And
Right.
and so every time I'm with a group of physicians, I transform them into what I call birth guardians. And
Yeah.
a birth guardian understands the principles of gentle birth. That yes, this woman is the central focus, and the baby has a neurological program in its brain to get out. When I was working in the neuro intensive care unit in Dayton, Ohio, we had a woman that came in who was unconscious, 40 weeks pregnant. She'd been involved in a head-on auto collision, and they had to drill a hole in her cranium, put her on a ventilator to save her life, to relieve the pressure in her brain. And the doctors didn't know what to do because she was 40 weeks pregnant.
Mm.
And one miracle after another, even though she was in a coma and she had all the IVs hanging, we didn't have monitors. We didn't have electronic fetal monitors in those days. And we didn't even have Dopplers. We had fetoscopes, and it was my job to listen to that baby's heartbeat every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes, we monitored. She was on a cardiac monitor. She was on a dopamine drip. She was on there's so much going on medically, but guess what happened? Her body released enough oxytocin to go into normal labor. And the doctors couldn't do a cesarean because that would jeopardize both the baby and the mother's life. So
Right.
they waited, and we did what we always do with people who are in a coma. We adjust their position every half hour. We turn them, and so they won't get bed sores. And so we did that with her and the baby. And yes, the doctors delivered her baby, but the baby did all the work. And it was like, oh my gosh, even though this woman is in a coma, the baby was born successfully. And of course they whisked the baby away to a intensive care unit. Then it was not called, we had NICU, which was the neuro-intensive care unit, but we had the special care baby unit. And I want to tell you one more thing about this. We
Yes.
snuck the baby in at night and put it on the mother's chest, even though she was in a coma. And I had read a book by Ashley Montague called Touching, and the importance of being touched as a human being.
Mm.
It's the first sense that comes online as a newborn or in utero, and it's the last sense to leave. So even though we're in a coma, we can still feel and sense through the neurological system the ability to be touched. And this is why we have to touch women in labor for sure, because I'm going to talk about in just a moment all of the things that increase women's comfort. But this baby would cry on her chest and was rooting and looking for the nipple, even though it was being bottle fed in the special care unit. And eventually, about 3 days after the baby was born, we did this every night for about an hour. And 3 days later, the mother started coming out of her coma, And at about 4 days, she was extubated. She was breathing on her own. And yes, she had a long recovery to do. But the very first thing she said was, "Where's my baby? I heard my baby crying."
Wow.
And so the very last principle of gentle birth, of the 10 principles, is that there is so much more to birth than we can see or feel or sense. And my trainings are a combination of science, technology, and the touchy-feely. So what I call that, what the principles of gentle birth are, truths that were true 10,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago. They're true today, and they'll still be true 1,000 years from now, God willing that we still are reproducing and not destroying the planet. And so I call it a combination of high tech and high touch. So
Right.
to be a birth guardian, as I said, anybody can do it. And when you see the doctors, like I'm going next month, in April, I'm going to the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. I'm going back. I haven't been back since 2019 because of COVID. COVID kept me home for 2.5 years. It
Yeah.
kept us all here and helped increase the vitality of the planet, I think. But I'm going back. And when I was there in 2019, I was teaching a bliss-born hypnosis for birth workshop to practitioners. How can you walk in a room, just like I did in Ho Chi Minh City, and help a woman feel comfortable in her body? And it's not about being fearless in birth. It's about increasing the amount of courage that you have and feeling that, because what the mind thinks, the body feels. What the mind thinks, the baby feels. So what the mother's mind is thinking, the baby feels. And so I teach a 5-week series of classes to parents called Blissborn, birth hypnosis, birth self-hypnosis. But I also teach the practitioners a practitioner course. So the woman doesn't have to have hypnosis, but you have to know the principles, the gentle birth principles, the principles of the neurology of the brain, the fact that we have 33 hormones that will automatically produce results combined with the neurobiology of the baby's brain. So the two work together simultaneously.
The hormonal dance. Yeah.
It's the birth dance under any condition. Otherwise, we would have died out as a species a long time ago.
Right.
And unfortunately, many of the practices of modern technological birth work against the gentle birth principles. And so when doctors and midwives, there's a wonderful doctor, Florencia Hortel in she's in a small hospital in La Plata, Argentina. And I did an interview like this with her in Spanish, and she always tells me, "You're my guru, you're my guru, you're my guru," because she says, "I can grow my fingernails long now because I don't put them inside of women. I I let the women be in charge. And when she walked in that auditorium, she's taken every workshop that I've done. I've been to her hospital to teach there. And she lets the women do everything. The partners together bring about the birth, and she records it on video. And it's because she can see this woman's reactions and responses to what's going on in her body. And so, yes, you have to understand the physiology. You have to understand that the uterus builds a fundus by bringing up the cervix and builds the muscles at the top of the uterus with the cervix. When the fundus is nice and big and can push down 44 kilos of pressure, guess what? Your cervix is gone. It works together in that way. 44 kilos is 90 pounds of downward pressure. And that's exactly at the same time that the baby is making its own journey. So to become a birth guardian, you understand that you're there to let birth happen, to allow birth to happen, and you only intervene when it's absolutely necessary, when your gut and your observations and your understanding says, this is no longer normal. And so you have to see and feel and play on those other senses and and create a practice in your own life, a daily practice in your own life of surrender to what I call, well, I think they said it in Star Wars or whatever film. It's the Force.
Right.
It's in all of us. And so for you to walk into that room and think positive thoughts. So at the University of Buenos Aires, I brought in 12 volunteers, and 6 of them pretend to be a pregnant client, and 6 of them pretend to be doctors and or midwives. And the first group of doctors or midwives, I take them in the corner and I said, I want you to think one thought. I don't want to be here. I have other things to do. I'm too busy. And I don't like this person. So that's a couple of thoughts, but it's all on the same theme. Okay. And then I set a timer. And with the timer, I give them 3 minutes to stand in front of each other. And I also say, no eye contact, no touching whatsoever, and act irritated. And so some people act it out. They're looking at their watch. They're like, and
Yeah.
and the timer goes off. And then I pass the microphone to the 6 pretend clients. Every single one of them has a physiological response to the other person's thoughts. One has a stomach ache, one has weak knees, one is sobbing, and her throat was closing, one has palpitations, and so if you only knew how much influence you have, every single person in that birth room is affecting the outcome. And so then I ask for new volunteers, or we switch it up. And I take this new group of doctors or midwives and go over into the corner and I say, I want you to focus on one thought and one thought only. You are the most beautiful person I have ever had the privilege to meet. I love you. And just think that, and be sure to make eye contact. And I set the timer for 3 minutes. And so the exercise never lasts the 3 minutes. By the end of 1 minute, they're in an embrace, they're hugging each other, they're laughing, they're both crying. Because when you open your heart, when you feel your own humanity, you allow that other person to express theirs. And I see this. Babies all come out exactly the same way, but they come out easier. They come out faster. They come out in a calmer state when the mother feels seen and heard and loved and supported. And that's what Gentle Birth was about. That's what I wrote Gentle Birth Choices about. And yes, I hate to tell you, the wisdom of Gentle Birth will not be out by the end of 2023 because it has to go through an enormous process. I've got about 26 people working with me to verify all the quotes in it because
Right.
I'm quoting midwives, I'm quoting doctors all the way back to 500 BCE. I'm taking quotes out of the Babylonian Talmud. Oh my gosh, I wish I could share all of them, but I will be doing Instagrams and things as I come up with just a really interesting quote. And I have a collection of medical textbooks and midwifery textbooks. I started collecting them because my grandmother right there was a midwife and nurse, and I grew up with that. But I had one of her textbooks. It's the textbook is right there on underneath her photograph, and it's called Feminology by Dr. Florence Dressler. You can buy a copy online. I've looked it up, and yes, she does have a bio in the Library of Congress. I've looked that up too. Um, but it's called Feminology, a guide for womankind. And it's everything from how to avoid pregnancy. Oh, my favorite quote on how to avoid pregnancy: get up before your husband does and read your Bible. So, and
Love that.
she goes on to explain, if you're centered and grounded and courageous in your love of God, um, you won't put up with his basically bullshit. and and you will also know your own cycle, you'll know your fertility, and you will just refuse sex when you're fertile. And in Judaism, it's just the opposite. You want to have sex when only when you're fertile, because we so this book also has how to deal with labor, how to birth. It has a compendium of a materia medica for homeopathic remedies. It has how to make tinctures and treat childhood illnesses. It has the how to increase your breast milk, the diet that you should be eating. It's a textbook, a guide for womankind, and it was published in 1903. And so there's so much forgotten wisdom. And I'm so fortunate to have one of my colleagues of blessed memory, Carla Hartley. She put in her will to send me. She knew she was dying, and she and I had this love of the wisdom of old textbooks of midwifery and obstetrics. And that's when everybody knew how to deliver a breech baby. Everybody knew how to get a baby out. And all the things that we do now that are so special, they're all in the books. And so we just have to combine those things. But Carla Hartley's daughter, Heather, sent me 10 cases of books. And I've sent some out for restoration and to keeping them. The oldest one is 1781, and they go my collection goes through the early Lamaze books, and I've got the very first ICEA meeting in the 60s, the books of some of the leaders in the gentle birth movement. The gentle birth movement was born out of the 1960s,
Right.
and we're in our fourth generation now. And
But what's
water,
interesting,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, what's interesting is that what the picture you're building up is that so I imagine, I'm sure that different times in your career, and you mentioned this about when you were an obstetric nurse and then you were kicked out, in your words, that you have been seen or portrayed as a disruptor, a radical. And I think the picture you're building up there is that it's the other way around. It's that modern managed technological approaches to birth are new and disruptive and radical, and that you're you are uh, you're continuing the wisdom of the ages around birth and letting that come back to us, letting us come back to it. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, it's I feel like when I wrote that down in my notebook, when I was 13, we must change the way we welcome babies into the world. It was getting back to what my grandmother did. I read her journals, and
Yeah.
and she never learned how to drive, but she never missed a birth on any of the farms. There was a lot of Mennonite people, and somebody would always come and get her, whether it was a horse and carriage or or somebody's automobile. They'd come and get her. She never missed a birth. And she said, and her journal was so like Mrs. Jones, baby boy, payment during the Great Depression, 2 bushels of potatoes, um, 1/4 side of beef. It was like,
Right.
what does that amount to? And yes, in my career, I've gone through this, leaving the obstetric nursing, going into cardiac care, then pediatrics, then training as a home birth midwife under the tutelage of some amazing certified nurse midwives, being prosecuted for doing home birth, having my nursing license withdrawn and then restored just because I was going to home births. I was disrupting the norm. Nurses in California weren't allowed to go to home births. So that's why I moved to Oregon, where nurses were welcome to attend home
Right.
births.
Yeah.
And in this grand experiment of 40 years, I've seen the power of birth. I've seen the power of co-creation. And and when I authored Gentle Birth Choices, in the original draft was 1992. I gave birth in 78, 84, and 86. 84 and 86 were both water births. And my first professional lecture to midwives and nurses and doctors was 1 month after I gave birth in 1984 in my living room, because I had gone to France when I was pregnant. I had met with Frederic Laboyer, and Frederic Laboyer was not a water birth supporter. He was, he felt like it was too good, and that those babies would not have the reality that birth would give them, that it would be too easy.
Not enough struggle. Yeah.
And that if we didn't have the struggle, that those babies would not want to stay in their bodies. We had a very amazing philosophical discussion in the year 2000. He and I did, through an interpreter, because he was only speaking French. at that time. He was living in London, and we were on the phone, and I said, excusez-moi, pardon-moi. I I have to do what I have to do. He tried to talk me out of promoting Waterbirth. And I said, but it's going to have a life of its own. It's going, and God gave us the gift of Waterbirth in order to address what was wrong with normal vaginal natural birth. He gave us Waterbirth as this incredible opportunity to see that a woman could give birth all by herself, that she could be in an upright position, that she could be kneeling on one leg and literally lift the baby out of herself. And when you have seen that as a doctor, like my dear friend Florencia Hortel in La Plata, Argentina, she said, I'm there to take the pictures now because these
Right.
women understand that it's under their power, it's under their steam. It's women giving birth. And that's what I don't even like to use the word natural anymore, Adam, because natural has been co-opted to mean vaginal.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I understand that. And that was a difficult choice for us about what to call it. And I think you're right. And unfortunately, the forces of the system that's trying to impose technology or management onto birth is powerful, isn't it? And it will try and co-opt where it can. Now, I think we are going to draw our discussion to a conclusion. I think that this has been really amazing. I think that what's really come through in you with your unique ability to tell stories and to inform based in science but inspiring. That's really come through today, and I want to thank you so much for giving this time and sharing that with us. What is it that you would like to suggest that for mothers who are expecting and would like to follow up on some of the things that we talked about and with you directly or otherwise? What would you suggest that they do next?
Um, First of all, you can go to waterbirth.org, my website, and it's going through a major overhaul. You know how you have to redecorate every once in a while. But
Of course.
the new website will have lots more video on it and pieces. And for anyone who has watched this series, I would love to offer a free gift. And that free gift is a 1 hour video called The Gifts of Water, The Gifts of Waterbirth. And if you don't see it on my website by the time that this is all finished, just pop me an email, barbara@waterbirth.org, or send me a DM to at the Barbara Harper or at Waterbirth INT. It's easy to find me out there.
Yeah.
And also, if you'd like scientific literature, there's a lot of literature on my website. And if you're a doctor, a midwife, or a nurse, I encourage you to take my Waterbirth certification course for professionals. And in the very near future, we'll have besides the Gifts of Waterbirth, we'll have a Waterbirth course just for doulas so they can become community Waterbirth educators. And we've got a group of 10, a cohort of 10 right now that are just starting that program. And one other thing, before the wisdom of gentle birth is born and out there with my publisher of Inner Traditions, the essential guide to water birth has to come first. And that is just a monumental textbook on the use, I call it water assisted labor and water assisted birth. And so it's an essential for every practitioner in the world, because my goal with Waterbirth is to make it an available option for every person who wants to use it in every birth setting. And there you go. So
that's a goal we share. So this has been really fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm just dazzled by the drive that you continue to have to get all the messages, the education, the inspiration for people who care for women and for women to to take this path, to choose to find courage. It's just for fantastic. Thank you so much.
remember, you don't have to be fearless in birth. You just have to have a great amount of courage. That's all it takes to be human.
On that note, thank you, Barbara. Really appreciate it. Take care.